For 7 years, Ruby Tiberius lived in absolute silence. Her father, an ancient vampire king with power over life and death, spent centuries of knowledge trying to fix it. 23 mystical healers, blood rituals, celestial magic, 0 results. Then, a homeless 10-year-old boy with dirt under his nails walked up to her in a park, reached into her ear, and did the impossible. In 30 seconds, she heard sound for the first time in her eternal life. But what that vampire king did for that homeless boy 60 seconds later, and the secret he revealed, that's the part that changed 2 worlds forever. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section what time it is and where you're watching from. And remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story. Now, let's continue. Papa. The word formed on her lips in silence, a shape without sound, a prayer without an answer. Ruby Tiberius's mouth moved carefully, deliberately, the way moonlight might trace shadows without ever touching them. Her voice was soft, uncertain, reaching out into a world she had never truly experienced. Cassius Tiberius heard it, but Ruby didn't. She couldn't hear anything. Not the whisper of her father's velvet coat as he turned toward her. Not the ancient creak of the manor's stone floors beneath his boots. Not even the sound of her own voice calling out to him. For 7 years, Ruby had lived in absolute silence. A silence so complete, so total that every word she spoke was nothing more than a faithful guess. She remembered the shape of Papa on her lips because she'd practiced it 1,000 times, watching her father's face soften each time she said it, trusting that she'd gotten it right. But she had never heard it, not once. Cassius stood there in the doorway of their Gothic estate, watching his 7-year-old daughter try to navigate a world that existed only in silence. His jaw tightened, not from anger, not from frustration, but from a pain so deep, so profound that it had carved permanent shadows into his immortal features. This was a being who'd survived over a millennium of wars, betrayals, and losses that would have destroyed lesser creatures. Cassius, the vampire king of the Eastern Court, wasn't easily shaken. But watching his daughter live in silence, that shook him every single night. Cassius Tiberius could command shadows with a whisper. He could bend the will of lesser immortals with a single glance. Across 7 realms, his name was spoken in reverent fear, a legend carved from centuries of power and absolute authority. Kings bowed. Ancient creatures stepped aside. The very air shifted when he entered a room. But he couldn't help his daughter here. 7 years. 7 endless years of watching Ruby live in a prison of silence while he wielded power that meant nothing. He'd summoned 23 of the most gifted beings in existence. Seraphine, the blood mage who'd studied healing arts for 3 centuries, spent months weaving intricate spells around Ruby's small form. Nothing. The celestial healer from the northern court traveled through 3 dimensions to examine her, his hands glowing with divine light. Nothing. Ancient witch doctors from forgotten tribes performed rituals so dangerous they'd nearly cost Cassius his own immortality. Fae physicians with their impossible magic. Demon healers with their dark bargains. Nothing. 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 The rituals left scars. Not on Ruby, but on Cassius. Each failure carved deeper into something he'd thought invulnerable after 1,000 years of existence. He'd faced armies, survived betrayals, outlived empires. But this silent war against his daughter's condition was destroying him in ways no enemy ever could. Ruby didn't understand the weight of it. She couldn't. She lived in her silent world with the innocent resilience of childhood, exploring the Gothic estate with wide, curious eyes. She'd stand at the tall windows during moonlit nights, watching the mortal world beyond her gates with a fascination that broke her father's heart. Her small hand would rise unconsciously, tilting her head to the right, tapping gently near her ear. Always the right ear. Cassius had noticed it 1,000 times, but thought it merely a habit, a small gesture of frustration. The specialists never noticed it at all. They were too busy searching for curses, for dark magic, for celestial interference. Too focused on the impossible to see the simple. Tonight, another ritual had failed. Cassius stood alone in his study, ancient texts scattered across his desk, candles burning low. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the crushing realization that all his power, all his centuries of knowledge, meant absolutely nothing. He made a decision that surprised even himself. Tomorrow, at dusk, he would take Ruby to the mortal world. Not to find a cure. He'd abandoned that desperate hope. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could give her one moment of simple, mortal joy. A park. Swings. Grass beneath her feet. It wasn't healing, but it was something. It was all he had left to offer. Ryan Matthews learned to disappear at 10 years old. Not through magic or supernatural ability, but through necessity. After his mother lost her battle with cancer, the world became a hostile place ruled by systems that didn't care and people who looked through him rather than at him. The foster home lasted 3 months. 3 months of harsh voices, locked cupboards, and a man whose heavy footsteps on the stairs at night taught Ryan that some monsters were entirely human.
So he ran.
10 years old, with nothing but his mother's voice in his memory telling him to be kind, to always help when he could, to be better than the world's cruelty. The streets became his teacher. He developed a code, rules that kept him alive and human. Stay invisible. Never draw attention. Never beg because begging made you a target. Never steal because his mother would have been ashamed. And always help when you could because sometimes being useful meant being allowed to exist. Invisibility required observation. Ryan learned to read people the way scholars read ancient texts. A twitch of Ryan's trained eyes caught it immediately. The tilt of her head. Always to the right. Her small hand rising unconsciously to tap near her ear, once, twice, a gesture of frustration, so familiar it made his chest tighten. The exact movements. The precise angle. Mrs. Chun had done the same thing for 3 agonizing days. The fading sunlight caught the little girl's profile at the perfect angle as she turned her head. Ryan's breath stopped. There, in her right ear canal, visible for just a heartbeat, he saw it. The dark, dense mass. Deep and lodged. The same blockage that had tortured Mrs. Chun. The same thing he'd successfully removed. He could fix this.
Right now.
In seconds. He could give this little girl back something she'd clearly lost. The certainty was absolute, undeniable. But the man... Ryan's survival instincts warred with everything his mother had taught him. The man radiated danger in ways Ryan couldn't articulate. Something in his impossible stillness. Something in the way shadows seemed to gather around him despite the open space. Something in his too-perfect posture that screamed predator, ancient and powerful beyond human understanding. Stay invisible. Stay safe. This wasn't his problem. But the little girl tilted her head again, tapped her ear with small, frustrated fingers, and Ryan saw Mrs. Chen's tears. Heard his mother's voice, soft and clear in his memory. Always help when you can, baby. Always. His legs shook as he stood. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed to sit back down, to disappear, to survive. But Ryan Matthews had learned that sometimes survival wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to be human. He took a step forward. Ryan forced his feet to move, each step requiring more courage than he knew he possessed. He kept his hands visible, open, unthreatening, the way you approached a dangerous animal.
His mouth was dry.
His heart thundered so loud, he was certain the whole park could hear it. Cassius sensed him, before any mortal would. The racing heartbeat, the scent of fear, the presence of a child, malnourished, alone, approaching his daughter. Every protective instinct from 1,000 years of existence flared to life. Ruby didn't hear Ryan approach. She was examining a fallen leaf with silent fascination. Cassius turned, and Ryan's courage nearly shattered. The man's eyes were too pale, like winter ice, filled with knowledge that no human should possess. Ancient, knowing, dangerous beyond anything Ryan had ever encountered on the streets. "Step back, boy." The voice was cold, absolute, carrying the weight of unquestionable command. Ryan's legs trembled violently. His voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "Please, sir. I think something's in her ear. I've helped with this before. I can see it from here." Everything changed. Cassius's demeanor shifted from cold to something far worse, something predatory and protective all at once. His hand moved with impossible speed, positioning himself between Ryan and Ruby. For one terrible heartbeat, his eyes flashed amber in the dimming light, reflecting like an animal's. The temperature dropped. The air itself became heavy, oppressive, suffocating. Ryan couldn't breathe, couldn't move. This was a mistake. A fatal mistake. But the little girl tapped her ear again, and Ryan found his voice despite the terror freezing his blood. "I know you don't trust me." The words tumbled out, desperate, shaking. "I know I look like nothing, but I helped someone 6 months ago with the same thing. She screamed for 3 days until I fixed it." He gestured weakly toward Ruby, his hand trembling. "Your daughter, she's doing the same movements. The exact same ones.
Please just let me try."
"I won't hurt her." His voice broke completely. "I swear on my mom's grave." The oath hung in the air between them.
Sacred.
Absolute. The most solemn promise a 10-year-old orphan could make. Cassius studied him with those ancient, impossible eyes. He saw the torn clothing, the hollowed cheeks of hunger, the exhaustion carved into a face too young to carry such weight. But he also saw something else. Something that centuries of reading mortals had taught him to recognize. Desperation, yes. Fear, absolutely. But underneath it all, pure, undeniable compassion. A desperate need to help despite obvious, overwhelming terror. This child was terrified of him, knew approaching was dangerous, and did it anyway.
For Ruby.
For a stranger he'd never met. Cassius's hand remained poised, ready to strike at the first sign of threat. His voice dropped to something low and deadly, a promise wrapped in ice. "You have 30 seconds. If you cause her pain, you won't survive to regret it." But he stepped fractionally aside. Ryan's knees nearly buckled with relief and renewed terror. 30 seconds. He had 30 seconds before the monster wearing human skin would end him. He dropped to his knees before the little girl could give her another chance to hear. Ryan dropped to his knees before Ruby, his hands still shaking but visible, unthreatening. She looked at him with curious, silent eyes, her head tilting slightly as if asking a question he couldn't hear. He moved with deliberate slowness, showing Cassius every motion, every intention. "I need to tilt her head toward the light," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. Cassius nodded once. A single sharp movement. But Ryan could feel him coiled like a spring, ready to strike, ready to end this in a heartbeat if anything went wrong. Ryan gently reached toward Ruby's face. She didn't flinch, just watched him with those wide, trusting eyes. He angled her head carefully to the right, catching the last rays of dying sunlight.
There.
He saw it clearly now. The deep, hardened blockage lodged in her ear canal, exactly like Mrs. Chen's.
Dark. Dense.
Unmistakable. "There's something blocking her ear," Ryan explained in a shaking voice, knowing Ruby couldn't hear him but hoping her father could. "It's deep, but I can reach it. I've done this before. I just need to. I need to be very careful. His fingers, calloused from street life, but surprisingly gentle, moved with the precision born of necessity and prior success. He'd learned this with Mrs. Chun. Learned that patience mattered more than speed. That steady pressure was safer than force. The mass resisted. Sweat dripped down Ryan's face despite the cooling evening air. His entire world narrowed to this single moment, this single task. Behind him, he could feel Cassius's presence like a physical weight, oppressive and deadly. Cassius's hand hovered millimeters from Ryan's throat, closer than the boy realized. One wrong move. One cry of pain from Ruby. That's all it would take. Ruby winced once, a small, involuntary reaction. Cassius growled. The sound came from deep in his chest, something that belonged to a predator, not a man. Not remotely human. Ryan's hands froze, terror spiking through him. Almost. Ryan breathed, forcing his fingers to continue despite the sound of death behind him. Please, just almost. Then, with a final gentle pressure, careful and steady, the obstruction shifted.
Moved.
Slid free and fell into Ryan's palm, a dark, dense mass that had stolen 7 years of sound from a little girl's life. For one suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then Ruby's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened in shock, forming a perfect circle of astonishment. The breeze rustled through the leaves above them, and her head whipped toward the sound with violent surprise. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. She gasped, her small body jerking with the unfamiliar sensation. Cassius exhaled sharply in disbelief, and Ruby turned toward him, tears streaming down her face, her expression a mixture of wonder and overwhelming emotion. "Papa," she whispered. Then louder, her voice breaking with joy and confusion and discovery.
"Papa."
"I hear you. I hear the wind. I hear everything." She threw herself at Ryan, her small arms wrapping around his neck, sobbing into his shoulder with the force of 7 years of silence finally broken. The homeless boy, who hadn't been hugged since his mother died, who'd survived on streets that taught him to never cry, broke down completely. His thin shoulders shook. Tears he'd held back for months poured freely. Cassius, ancient beyond measure, powerful beyond mortal comprehension, fell to his knees beside them both. His centuries of carefully maintained composure shattered like glass. His hands, which had been poised to kill seconds ago, now trembled as they reached toward his daughter and the boy who'd given her back the world. He whispered in a language older than the mortal world, words of gratitude that predated human civilization. Thank you. The three of them knelt there in the dying light, in the boundary between day and night, between two worlds now forever changed. A vampire king, his daughter, and a homeless boy who'd just performed a miracle that centuries of magic could not. Cassius remained on his knees, his ancient eyes fixed on the trembling boy before him. For the first time in centuries, he truly saw someone. Not their power, not their threat level, not their political value. He saw Ryan, a mortal child with nothing, suffering alone, who had chosen courage and compassion over safety, who had approached certain danger to help a stranger, who had risked everything for someone he'd never met. Ruby refused to release Ryan, her small hands clutching his torn shirt like a lifeline, her face still pressed against his shoulder as she discovered the symphony of the world around her. Every rustle, every breath, every small sound a revelation. Cassius made a decision that would shock his entire court, that would break a dozen ancient protocols, that would change the very foundation of his world. But in this moment, kneeling in a darkening park with his daughter finally hearing and a homeless boy who'd performed the impossible, none of that mattered. "Ryan," he said, his voice still rough with emotion. The boy looked up, fear and confusion warring in his eyes. "I need to tell you the truth about what I am and what I'm offering you." The last light faded from the sky. The park stood empty around them, suspended in that liminal space between worlds. Cassius allowed his human disguise to slip, just enough. His eyes began to glow amber, reflecting light that shouldn't exist. His fangs extended slightly, elegant and deadly. His presence shifted, became undeniably otherworldly, filling the space with an ancient power that made the air itself feel heavier. Ryan should run. Every survival instinct he possessed screamed at him to run. But Ruby's arms remained around him, warm and trusting. And in the monster's glowing eyes, impossibly, Ryan saw kindness, gratitude, something that looked almost like love. "I am Cassius Tiberius, vampire king of the Eastern Court," he said quietly, each word deliberate. "I have ruled for over a millennium. I command power that could level cities. I have wealth beyond measure and knowledge spanning centuries." He paused, his glowing eyes never leaving Ryan's face. "And you, Ryan, a 10-year-old mortal child, just performed a miracle that defied all of it. You succeeded where 23 of the most powerful beings in existence failed. You gave my daughter back the world." Ryan's breath came in short, terrified gasps. A vampire. The man was a vampire. The monster was real. But the monster was crying, tears tracking down his too-perfect face, and his daughter, still clinging to Ryan, was laughing through her own tears as she listened to the night birds calling. "You are not alone anymore," Cassius said, and the words carried the weight of an unbreakable vow. He extended his hand, palm up. "Not to harm, not to threaten, to offer. I claim you as family, Ryan Matthews. Under my protection by choice, not by blood. You will have a home, safety, education, love. Everything you've lost, everything you've been denied, I will give you freely." His voice dropped lower, intimate and solemn. "When you are older, if you choose, I will offer you immortality, the chance to live beyond mortal years. But that choice will always be yours and yours alone. Tonight, you are simply my daughter's savior, and that makes you mine to protect." Ryan stared at the extended hand, his mind struggling to process the impossible. A home, safety, family, things he'd stopped dreaming about months ago. His own hand, small and dirty and trembling, reached out and took the vampire's. Cassius's grip was gentle but firm, sealing a bond more powerful than any magic. He released Ryan's hand and removed the signet ring from his own finger, an ancient piece of silver carved with symbols older than written language. He placed it carefully on Ryan's finger. It was too large, sliding loosely, but its meaning was unmistakable. "This marks you as protected by the Tiberius line," Cassius said. "No creature of darkness will harm you. No immortal will threaten you. You wear my house's symbol. Your family now." Ruby finally pulled back enough to look at Ryan, her face radiant with joy and wet with tears. "You're my brother now," she said, hearing her own voice for the first time, marveling at the sound of it. "I heard you. You were the first voice I ever heard." Ryan, overwhelmed beyond words, could only nod as the two of them, vampire king and homeless boy, daughter and savior, formed a family born not from blood, but from something far more powerful. From choice. The estate materialized from shadows as they approached, a Gothic mansion that seemed to exist in a pocket reality separate from the mortal world. Wrought iron gates opened silently. Stone gargoyles watched with eyes that might have been alive. The building itself was ancient, all spires and stained glass windows that caught moonlight and transformed it into something both beautiful and unsettling. Ryan's terror had returned in full force. Ruby held his hand tightly, chattering excitedly about all the sounds she was discovering, but Ryan could barely hear her over the pounding of his own heart. He was walking into a vampire's lair.
This was how people disappeared.
This was how children were never seen again. But Cassius's hand rested gently on his shoulder, protective rather than restraining, and that small gesture kept Ryan moving forward. The great hall was massive, all vaulted ceilings and shadows that seemed to breathe. Cassius had summoned his inner circle with a single command, and they came immediately. Ryan watched them arrive, one by one, and each appearance made his survival instincts scream louder. Alara arrived first, ancient and elegant, her silver hair cascading down her back, her eyes holding the weight of centuries. Marcus came next, massive and intimidating, his presence pure violence barely contained. Seraphine materialized from shadow itself, the blood mage, her hands still bearing faint scars from rituals Ryan couldn't imagine. A dozen others followed, filling the great hall with immortal beings whose eyes glowed in the darkness, whose presence made the air itself feel suffocating. Ryan wanted to run, wanted to disappear. Every face turned toward him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Marcus snarled, his voice a low growl that echoed through the hall. "You brought a mortal here? To the inner court?" His eyes, glowing red in the dim light, fixed on Ryan with undisguised contempt. "A child? My lord, what are you?" Silence. Cassius's single word carried absolute authority. Marcus's mouth snapped shut, though fury still burned in his eyes. Cassius stepped forward, Ruby still holding Ryan's hand, the boy trembling between them. The Vampire King's voice filled the hall, steady and powerful.
7 years, he began.
For 7 years, my daughter lived in silence. I summoned the most powerful beings in existence. 23 specialists. Centuries of combined knowledge. Ancient rituals that nearly cost me everything. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the assembled immortals. Every single one of you failed. I failed. The hall remained silent, but the tension was palpable. Tonight, in Immortal Park, this 10-year-old boy approached me despite obvious, overwhelming terror. He saw what none of you could see. He did what none of you could do. In 30 seconds, he gave my daughter back the world. Cassius reached down and carefully removed his signet ring from Ryan's finger, holding it high for all to see. The ancient symbol caught the light, undeniable proof of his claim. This boy succeeded where we all failed. He risked his life to help a stranger. He has courage we've forgotten in our immortality. He is under my protection. His voice dropped lower, carrying the weight of an unbreakable decree. And he is family. The silence that followed was absolute. Immortal beings who'd lived for centuries stared at the trembling mortal child, processing the impossible. Then Seraphine moved. The blood mage who'd spent months trying to heal Ruby with ancient magic stepped forward. The room tensed. Marcus's hand moved to his weapon. Seraphine knelt before Ryan, her eyes glowing with tears that shimmered in the darkness. When she spoke, her voice cracked with emotion that surprised everyone, including herself. "I studied for 3 centuries," she whispered. "You studied life. I looked for curses. You looked for kindness." Her tears fell freely now, staining the ancient stone floor. "Forgive me, young one. Forgive all of us. We forgot that sometimes the greatest magic is simple compassion." She took Ryan's hand and kissed it, a formal gesture of recognition and respect that sent shockwaves through the assembled court. One by one, they followed. Alara approached next, her ancient eyes soft with understanding. "Welcome, child." Marcus, still radiating tension, finally stepped forward and extended his clawed hand. "Welcome, Ryan of House Tiberius." His voice was gruff, but the gesture was genuine. The entire court, unanimous in acceptance, bowed to the mortal child who'd reminded them what they'd lost in their immortality. The practical logistics followed immediately. A protected room in the East Wing, overlooking the moonlit gardens. New clothes tailored to fit. Enrollment in the finest mortal school under a protected identity. Tutors in both mortal subjects and immortal knowledge. Everything a child needed. Everything Ryan had been denied for so long. Ryan stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed and exhausted, still clutching Ruby's hand. He had a home now, not just in one world, but in two. He had family. The first weeks transformed Ryan in ways he couldn't have imagined. New clothes appeared in his room, tailored to actually fit his thin frame. Real meals 3 times a day made his hollow cheeks gradually fill out. He'd forgotten what it felt like to not be hungry, to sleep in a bed that didn't disappear at dawn, to wake up without fear. Cassius became an unexpected guide, patient and gentle in ways that contradicted everything Ryan thought he knew about monsters. He helped Ryan navigate the complexities of mortal school under a protected identity, ensuring teachers understood his unique circumstances without knowing this supernatural truth. He taught Ryan how to move between worlds, how to exist in daylight normalcy and return to moonlit impossibility. Alara took over Ryan's education in immortal matters. She taught him vampire history spanning millennia, the intricate etiquette of the supernatural court, the politics between different factions. She explained why certain gestures meant respect, why others meant challenge, how to recognize the difference between various immortal beings. Her lessons were fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Marcus, despite his initial hostility, became Ryan's self-defense instructor. "You're part of this world now," he'd growled during their first session. "That means you're a target. You need to learn to protect yourself." But Ryan noticed the way Marcus pulled his punches, the unexpected patience in his instruction, the grudging respect that grew as Ryan refused to quit despite exhaustion. "You've got courage, boy," Marcus finally admitted. "Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless." But it was the nightly ritual with Ruby that truly became Ryan's anchor in this impossible new life. Every evening at dusk, like clockwork, Ruby would knock on his door. They'd settle by the large window overlooking the moonlit gardens, and Ruby would look at him with those wide, expectant eyes, hungry for understanding of her new world of sound. "What's that?" she'd ask, pointing toward a sound only she could hear with her newly awakened senses. "Crickets," Ryan would explain. "They chirp to find each other in the dark. It means summer's still here." And that's the house settling. Old buildings make sounds as they cool down at night. It's like the house is getting comfortable. She learned to distinguish Marcus's heavy footsteps that announced his presence from Alara's silent gliding that meant she'd already been in the room for minutes. She discovered the howl of distant wolves that made her shiver with primal recognition. She marveled at the whisper of wind through the cemetery trees, how it sounded different from wind through regular trees, somehow sadder and more ancient. Ryan taught her the language of the world, and in doing so, found purpose deeper than survival. He wasn't just existing anymore. He was needed. He mattered. One night, 3 weeks after the park, Ryan noticed Ruby humming unconsciously as she listened to the night sounds. The tune was tentative, uncertain, but hauntingly beautiful. "Ruby," he said softly, "do you know you're humming?" She stopped immediately, her hand flying to her mouth in surprise. It was beautiful. Can you do it again? On purpose this time?" Her voice, unused for 7 years except for tentative words, was raw and uncertain as she began to hum again. But there was something achingly pure about it, something that made Ryan's chest tighten with emotion he couldn't name. "Now try singing," he encouraged. "Real words." Ruby's face transformed with concentration and wonder. She began to sing a melody Ryan didn't recognize, a lullaby with words in a language he'd never heard. Her father's language, she explained later. The song he used to hum to her in her silence, a melody she'd felt in the vibrations of his chest but never truly heard. The door opened silently. Cassius stood in the doorway, frozen, his ancient face transformed by emotions he'd thought lost centuries ago. He listened to his daughter sing the lullaby he'd hummed to her for 7 years, hearing her voice carry the melody for the first time. Tears traced down his face, centuries of grief finally releasing. Ruby continued singing, and when she finished, she turned to Ryan with brilliant joy. "Now I teach you," she declared.
And she did.
She taught him words in ancient languages, told him stories of immortal wars and supernatural beauty, explained what it meant to know you'd live across centuries. Their mutual need healed them both. Ryan needed purpose, needed family, needed to matter. Ruby needed understanding, needed context, needed someone to share her journey of discovery. Together, they bridged 2 worlds and found something magic could never provide. They found each other. 3 years changed everything. Ryan was 13 now, taller and healthier, his hollow cheeks and frightened eyes replaced by the confidence of someone who'd found his place in 2 worlds. He was a straight-A student at the Mortal Academy, brilliant in ways that made his teachers wonder about his potential. But it was in the supernatural realm where Ryan truly shined. He'd become a bridge between worlds, trusted by both humans and immortals, carrying Cassius's signet ring with earned authority rather than borrowed protection. He'd chosen to remain mortal, at least for now. "I want to experience a full human life first," he'd told Cassius on his 12th birthday. "Before I decide about forever, I want to know what it means to be fully human." Cassius had embraced him, proud beyond measure of the wisdom in someone so young. Ruby, now 10, had blossomed into something extraordinary. She spoke 6 ancient languages fluently, her gift for sound extending to the music of words themselves. Piano lessons revealed a natural talent that made her instructor weep. She sang in the Mortal School choir, her voice a gift she shared freely, and every performance reminded Cassius of the miracle that had started everything. She moved between the mortal and immortal worlds with the ease of someone born to both, never forgetting the silence she'd escaped or the homeless boy who'd freed her. But the most profound change was in Cassius himself. The vampire king who'd ruled with ancient authority for over a millennium had been transformed by a single act of mortal compassion. He'd created Ryan Sanctuary, a formal program where the vampire court actively sought out homeless and forgotten children, both mortal and supernatural, offering them what Ryan had received: protection, homes, education, and the choice of family. The first child they saved was a 7-year-old girl abandoned at a bus station. Then twin boys fleeing abuse. A teenage vampire struggling with newly awakened powers and no guidance. One by one, the estate filled with children who'd been invisible, forgotten, left behind. And the supernatural world noticed. The Moonstone Pack approached first. Their alpha, a fierce werewolf named Rena who'd initially scorned the vampire's sentimentality, arrived at the estate with unexpected humility. "We want to do this too," she'd said simply. "We have space. We have strength. We have love to give." Her pack opened their dens to orphan children, offering the wild protection of wolves to those who'd never known safety. The Thornawood Coven followed. Ancient witches who'd spent centuries in isolation recognized the power in Ryan's simple act. They provided homes for children with untrained magic, those caught between mortal and supernatural, teaching them to control gifts that might otherwise destroy them. The Silverlight Court, the Fae who'd been neutral observers for millennia, created their own refuge for those caught between worlds, neither fully mortal nor fully immortal, giving them sanctuary in their twilight realm. Even the ancient guardians, elemental beings older than recorded history, offered protection to children forgotten by all societies, teaching them the language of earth and sky and water and flame. Across the realm, 52 children found families. 52 forgotten souls discovered they mattered. This supernatural world, once isolated and feared, once concerned only with power and politics and ancient rivalries, became a source of unexpected salvation. Ryan stood at the window of his room, watching the estate gardens below. They'd been transformed over 3 years. Where there had once been silent, Gothic beauty, there was now laughter. Children played together, mortal and immortal, learning from each other, teaching each other, building friendships that crossed impossible boundaries. Cassius appeared in the doorway, Ruby beside him. They joined Ryan at the window, the three of them watching the proof of what a single act of courage could create. Cassius placed his hand on Ryan's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I thought I was saving you, Ryan. I thought I was giving you a home." Ryan, now taller and more confident, but still carrying that same gentle compassion that had compelled him to approach a vampire in a darkening park, looked up at the ancient being who'd become his father. "You did save me, Papa Cassius. You gave me everything. But you also taught me that sometimes the most powerful magic is just noticing when someone needs help." Cassius pulled both children close, his arms encompassing them with a protective love that had grown rather than diminished over 3 years. His voice cracked as he spoke. "No, my son. You taught all of us. You saved Ruby. But in doing so, you saved all of us from forgetting what it means to be truly alive." Below them, a mortal girl taught a young vampire how to play hopscotch. A werewolf cub showed a witch child how to track by scent. A fey child sang while an elemental made flowers bloom in impossible colors. And in the center of it all, laughter rang out, pure and joyful, the sound of hope made real. Ryan had been right that night in the park. Sometimes the most powerful magic wasn't ancient rituals or blood spells or centuries of accumulated knowledge. Sometimes it was simply noticing, simply caring, simply choosing to help when it would be easier to look away. That was the real miracle. And it had changed 2 worlds forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, drop your favorite scene in the comments, and subscribe. Tomorrow's story is already waiting in the shadows. Thanks for watching.